Definitions of terms. Page 12. Baal Shem Tov. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and the mystical worldview surrounding Sefer Yetzirah, the Baal Shem Tov refers to Baal Shem Tov as the founder of Hasidism, a movement that emphasizes direct, experiential awareness of the divine within all aspects of existence. Very briefly, he taught that divine presence is not confined to intellectual contemplation of mystical structures, but permeates all of reality. His approach shifted emphasis from abstract metaphysical ascent toward devotional immediacy, joy, and attachment, dvakat, in everyday life. In a broader Kabbalistic sense, which Kaplan often presents sympathetically, his teaching can be seen as making the inner mystical dynamics of works like Sefer Yetzirah psychologically and spiritually accessible. In a single sentence, the Baal Shem Tov is the Hasidic master who taught that the infinite divine is encountered not only through esoteric contemplation, but directly within joyful, lived awareness of all existence. Bina. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and the Kabbalistic framework surrounding Sefer Yetzirah. Bina, understanding. Very briefly, Bina is the faculty that takes the flash of Chakma and gives it structure, form, and definition. If Chakma is a sudden, undivided insight, Bina is the process of analysis, differentiation, and articulation. It builds wisdom into something intelligible, breaking a unified idea into parts and relationships. Kaplan often describes this as the movement from intuitive grasp to conceptual clarity, the mind unpacking what was previously a single point of awareness. In a single sentence, Bina is the structured understanding that develops raw insight into articulated, comprehensible thought. Neshama. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and the mystical framework surrounding Sefer Yetzirah. Neshama, soul/breath. Very briefly, Neshama is the highest level of the human soul in classical Kabbalistic psychology. It corresponds to the level of pure intellectual spiritual awareness, above ordinary emotion, ruach, and life force, nefesh. Kaplan explains it as the aspect of consciousness that can perceive divine reality and abstract truth, especially through contemplation of higher wisdom. In this framework, Neshama is what allows a person to engage in true metaphysical understanding, linking human thought to the higher structures described in Sefer Yetzirah, such as the Sephirotic or letter-based architecture of creation. In a single sentence, Neshama is the highest level of the soul, the faculty of spiritual intellect that enables direct awareness and understanding of divine reality. Next, perhaps from the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan's Sefer Yetzirah, please explain to me very briefly the concept of Elohim and Bina, understanding, and how it relates to creation in Genesis and the 32 paths of wisdom. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and his reading of Sefer Yetzirah, you can connect these ideas as part of a single layered model of how reality unfolds. Very briefly, Elohim and Bina in Genesis. In Genesis, Elohim is the name used when God is acting as the ordering, structuring principle of creation. In later Kabbalistic mapping used by Kaplan, this creative structuring power is closely associated with Bina, because Bina is the faculty that differentiates, organizes, and gives form to undivided insight. So, Elohim equals the divine as structured creative power. Bina equals the inner level of understanding that produces structure. Creation and the 32 paths of wisdom. The opening of Sefer Yetzirah speaks of the 32 wondrous paths of wisdom. of Sefer Yetzirah speaks of the 32 wondrous paths of wisdom. Kaplan explains these as the basic channels through which divine wisdom becomes articulated reality, a combination of the 10 Sephirot, or fundamental principles, and the 22 Hebrew letters. These paths are essentially the building blocks of creation, the way undifferentiated divine wisdom becomes a structured cosmos. How it fits together, Kaplan-style synthesis. The infinite divine reality, beyond description, is not yet structured. Through a process of unfolding, wisdom emerges and becomes organized, Bina. That structured organization is expressed as Elohim in Genesis, the creative aspect that measures out reality. The 32 paths of wisdom are the underlying framework through which this structuring happens. In one sentence. In Kaplan's reading, Bina is the structuring faculty of understanding, Elohim is the divine force acting through that structuring in Genesis, and the 32 paths of wisdom describe the underlying channels through which this ordered creation becomes manifest. Page 13. Chakak. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and his reading of Sefer Yetzirah. Chakak, to engrave/to inscribe. Very briefly. Chakak literally means to engrave or carve, as opposed to writing on a surface. In Kaplan's explanation of Sefer Yetzirah, this term is used for how creation is brought forth, not as something external added onto reality, but as something inscribed into the fabric of existence itself. It is closely tied to the idea that the Hebrew letters and divine principles are engraved into reality, forming its underlying structure. Kaplan contrasts engraving with writing because engraving implies permanence and identity with a medium. Creation is not separate from the divine pattern, it is the pattern made manifest. In a single sentence, Chakak is the concept that creation is engraved into reality itself, meaning the world is formed by divine inscription rather than external construction. Page 14. Tzimtzum. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and the broader Kabbalistic framework he often draws from alongside Sefer Yetzirah. Tzimtzum, contraction/withdrawal. Very briefly. Tzimtzum is the idea that the infinite divine presence is contracted or concealed so that finite, distinct creation can exist. It does not mean God literally disappears, rather, His infinite presence is hidden in a way that allows space for limitation, form, and multiplicity. This concealment makes possible the structured world described in Sefer Yetzirah, where reality can be expressed through letters, Sephirot, and the 32 paths of wisdom. Kaplan often presents Tzimtzum as a way of explaining how the infinite, Ein Sof, can give rise to a finite, structured universe without being logically overwhelming or collapsing all distinction. In a single sentence, Tzimtzum is the divine self-concealment that creates conceptual space for a finite world to exist and for creation to unfold through structured channels of wisdom. Lamp of darkness. In the Zohar, the phrase often rendered as the lamp of darkness is a paradoxical mystical image pointing to how divine reality is encountered at its most concealed level. Very briefly, it refers to a kind of illumination that is only perceived as darkness because it is too intense or too hidden for ordinary perception. In Kabbalistic language, higher divine light can appear as darkness from below, since the receiving vessel cannot interpret it as light. It also reflects the idea that concealment itself is a form of revelation. What looks like absence is actually a deeper mode of presence. In a single sentence, the lamp of darkness in the Zohar describes a level of divine light so hidden or overwhelming that it is experienced as darkness, even though it is itself a form of illumination. The phrase lamp of darkness in the Zohar is typically expressed in Hebrew as Ner Dishukah. Literally, lamp of darkness. Ner equals lamp/light/candle. Dishukah equals of darkness, Aramaic form used in the Zohar. In Zoharic Aramaic, the phrase is part of its symbolic language where paradoxical expressions, light/darkness, revealed/concealed, are used to describe different levels of divine manifestation. Tohu and Bohu. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and his broader Kabbalistic framework around Sefer Yetzirah, Tohu and Bohu, formlessness and void. Very briefly, Tohu is understood as raw, undifferentiated potential, a state where things exist in a chaotic or unstructured way, before order is imposed. Bohu is often explained as emptiness or receptivity, the space or capacity that allows form to emerge. In Kaplan's synthesis of Kabbalistic sources, Tohu represents indirect intensity or chaos of potential. Bohu represents the latent framework or receptacle for structure. Together, they describe the earliest stage of creation in Genesis, a reality that is not yet ordered through the structured channels later described as the 32 paths of wisdom in Sefer Yetzirah. In a single sentence, Tohu and Bohu describe the primordial state of creation as unstructured potential, Tohu, and receptive emptiness, Bohu, before divine wisdom organizes reality into form. Page 16. Netzach and Hod. From the perspective of Aryeh Kaplan and the Kabbalistic framework surrounding Sefer Yetzirah, Netzach, endurance/victory. Very briefly, Netzach represents persistence, drive, and the force that pushes things forward into realization. It is the active momentum of manifestation continuing despite resistance or limitation. Hod, splendor/acknowledgement. Very briefly, Hod represents receptivity, humility, and structured reflection. It gives form by recognizing limits, shaping, and refining expression. In Kaplan-style synthesis, Netzach is the outgoing, forceful expansion of creative energy. Hod is the containment, articulation, and structuring of that energy into form. Together they balance each other as complementary modes of expression in the lower Sephirot. In a single sentence, Netzach is the driving force of expansion and endurance, while Hod is the shaping and refining power that gives that force intelligible form.